Hello. Today, we are going to discuss the chapter entitled Crisis Case Handling. To understand crisis case handling, we need to distinguish between what crisis interventionists and long-term therapists do. We need to understand the principles that underlie the two models, their objectives, client functioning, and assessment procedures.
On first glance, typical models for long-term therapy do not look very different from a crisis intervention model. What is different is that in long-term therapy, defining problems, identifying alternatives, and planning are much broader in scope, more methodological, and rely on continuous feedback loops to check effectiveness of intervention. A typical counseling session with a long-term client reviews progress since the previous session, collaboratively refines the plan of action if needed, processes the content of the session and the client's feelings about it, and then proposes a new homework assignment to be tried out before the next meeting. Crisis intervention models do not operate on such liberal time dimensions or problem scopes.
Please explain this model.
In crisis intervention, exploring the problems, identifying alternatives, planning and committing to a plan are all much more compressed in time and in scope.
So you are saying that what in long-term therapy may occur in a rather leisurely fashion over a period of weekly sessions may in crisis intervention commonly occur in a half hour to 2 hours.
Let's compare.
In long-term therapy, a great deal of background exploration may provide the therapist with a panoramic view of client dynamics.
The crisis worker's exploration typically is narrow and starts and stops with the specific presenting crisis.
The long-term therapist's view of alternatives and planning a course of action commonly incorporate psychoeducational processes that seek to change residual, repressive, and chronic client modes of thinking, feeling, and acting.
The crisis worker seeks to quickly determine previous coping skills and environmental resources available to the client, and use them in the present situation as a stopgap measure to gain time and provide a modicum of stability in an out-of-control situation.
The long-term therapist would view comprehensive personality change as a necessary part of the therapeutic plan.
The crisis worker would endeavor to change personality only to the degree necessary for restoring pre-crisis functioning.
A long-term therapist would look toward a methodological manipulation of treatment variables, assess those variables on a variety of dimensions, and process outcomes with the client.
A crisis worker often uses a best guess based on previous experience with what does and does not work with a particular problem.
The protocols for treatment in long-term therapy may be quite flexible and induce many tryouts of different procedures.
Crisis intervention is a good deal more rigid and may typically involve set procedures for moving the client from an immobile to immobilized state.
Assessment and feedback of outcome measures in long-term therapy typically involve a great deal of processing between client and therapist as to the efficacy of treatment.
Feedback and assessment in crisis intervention typically occur on a here-and-now basis, with emphasis on what changes have occurred in the previous minutes and what the client will do in the next few hours.
Students, please look at the chart on page 76 as we compare together the long-term therapy mode and the crisis case handling mode. Let's get started.